All right, what's going on, everyone? I shared some sources in a few community posts last couple days, and whoa, sparked a little bit of feedback, which was understandable. I don't expect everyone to agree with everything I say, and honestly, my hope is that any content of mine sparks an interest for you to dig further into whatever subject that is. As humbling as it has been to get comments from time to time that I'm the only person that somebody watches when it comes to the war in Ukraine, that genuinely makes me nervous. I'm no less likely to get something wrong than anyone else. So please consider watching and listening to many other sources as well. I'll touch on that a little bit more here in a bit, but handful of items around the war in Ukraine worth getting into today, including drone strikes, Belarus, and Bakhmut. So there have been two waves of Russian drone strikes against Ukraine in the last couple days. On December 14th, 13 Iranian Shahed-136 drones were launched. According to Ukrainian President Zelensky, all 13 had been shot down with no apparent damage to the electrical grid. Now, it's worth noting that when a missile or a drone is shot down, it doesn't just disappear. It's going to land somewhere, potentially detonating its warhead. So while 100% success rate shooting down these munitions mean the target likely isn't struck, there's still going to be visible damage somewhere. The second wave was on December 19th and reportedly included 23 Shahed drones, 18 of which were shot down. So while there were no reported casualties, they did damage critical infrastructure. And as of this recording at 10 a.m. Central on December 19th, it sounds like power is still out in parts of Kyiv. So over two waves, 31 out of 36 were shot down. These inexpensive drones or loitering munitions are designed to overwhelm an enemy's air defense network with the idea that some will get through. So in that sense, this strategy by Russia is working. I mean, from Russia's perspective, it's better to have a 14% success rate with these cheap drones than it is with multi-million-dollar missiles. This could mean that Russia's unable to produce as many missiles as are needed to keep up with these attacks, or that they're relying on external resources so they can focus their current missile supply on potential future targets. Take your pick. I think there's valid arguments to be had for both, or maybe a mix of the two, but either way, the volume and frequency don't appear to be in place to really do significant damage to the Ukrainian population. There's a reason these strikes aren't happening day after day to where Ukraine has no real chance of restoring power. I mean, think back to the strategic bombing, especially of Europe in World War II. There were cities that were hit a couple times a day for weeks and months on end. We're just not seeing that in Ukraine, and the reason is open for interpretation. All right, Belarus. What's happening in Belarus? So today, December 19th, Putin, along with his Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov, and Defense Minister Shoigu, arrived in Belarus to talk with President Lukashenko. As of this recording, we don't have any idea what came out of that, but it is a pretty substantial meeting. I mean, to get those three from Russia together for anything gives it some weight, and there has been a lot of attention on Belarus over the last couple of months. Back in February, Russia launched a portion of their invasion into Ukraine from Belarus. Before that and since, Russia's had a pretty sizable military presence there, and it has grown quite a bit recently. There are lots of rumors about what that could be. I've seen some valid points about how Russia is using Belarus as a training ground for some of their newly mobilized soldiers, which isn't crazy. It's not like Russia had a ton of these training facilities ready to go at a moment's notice, so why not leverage facilities of nearby allies? Of course, any Russian movement into Belarus also brings with it the concern that another attack could be coming from that direction. This is tricky. If you remember back before the war kicked off, the U.S. was sharing intelligence about Russian buildup all along the Ukrainian border. That was kind of out of the ordinary. Usually you don't want your enemy to know that you know where they are and what they're up to, but that information about Russian buildup was shared and made public. The belief is that that was used as sort of a signal to Putin to say, we see what you're up to, don't do it. In turn, a part of me thinks that if that same sort of buildup is happening right now in Belarus, that the United States and NATO would be quick to point it out the same way they did back in January and February. Maybe, but I'm nervous in putting too much faith in the idea that our intelligence agencies are all-knowing and all-seeing. I mean, they have gotten things wrong in the past, right? So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Russia could be building up in an area undetected. Most of the reports I've seen suggest that in Belarus right now, Russia has fewer than 10,000 troops and kind of a limited number of artillery and armored vehicles. Belarus has been holding more military readiness drills over the last couple weeks. Their force is estimated to be between 40 and 50,000 strong. Of course, Ukraine isn't taking any chances with this, so over the last few months, they have been building up their defenses pretty substantially along the border with Belarus. Last note on this topic, Putin also has a meeting with his military leadership, supposedly in the next week or so. So this combination of a public, highly visible meeting in Belarus and then with his commanders gives the impression that something is up. But I'm not going to try to speculate what that could be. We'll just have to wait and see. Moving to the situation on the ground, the one area that continues to see the heaviest fighting is in and around Bakhmut. Not a lot of change here. Russia continues to attack, primarily with the Wagner group on the outskirts of town. But overall, it's just been minor shifts in territorial control over the last couple weeks. If you look at the two maps on the screen, the red area is territory controlled by Russia, and there just hasn't been any major changes over the last month. Bakhmut is a good example of different narratives coming from each side. Russia says that it's a meat grinder, doing exactly as they had hoped for, demilitarizing Ukraine as they hopelessly reinforce an area where they're outgunned, outmanned, and have no real chance of holding on. For Russia, Bakhmut is presented as the key to Luhansk. When it falls, the entire Ukrainian line is at risk of collapsing. Reports from Ukraine around Bakhmut is that Russia seems to be reinforcing failure, sending soldiers to attack in killing fields where hours or days earlier the preceding attack was gunned down. Ukraine has also referred to this battle as a meat grinder, but they're talking about the mass amounts of Russian casualties. Ukraine certainly doesn't want to lose any of their territory to Russia, but I haven't seen anywhere near the amount of panic and concern about retreating or troops at risk of being cut off here like we saw at Severodonetsk this past summer. It's almost like these two sides are telling different stories about what's happening on the ground. Crazy, right? So I studied terrorism in college, and we would have to regularly dig through translations of Al-Qaeda messages. Some of it was operational, even tactical, but the majority of it was propaganda, essentially posturing to try to gain support from a broader community. We didn't pick up the most recent Al-Qaeda newsletter for casual reading. The whole idea there was to gain an understanding of what they're putting out into the public directly from the source. That said, I would never send somebody one of those Al-Qaeda newsletters if they wanted to get an overview of what was happening in the Middle East. One heavily biased source doesn't paint the best picture. And the same goes for the war in Ukraine. I find a lot of value in consuming a bunch of different information, some directly from governments, some from individual accounts from the war, and some analysts or commentators from all over the internet. And yes, that means consuming some pretty overt propaganda, because in the middle of all of that, you can start to figure out what's important to a certain side, what's being talked about, what's being downplayed, and more. That's a way to stay up to date with what's happening in the war in Ukraine, but far from the only way. So at the end of the day, I'm not an analyst, never have been. Just a regular guy interested in how the war in Ukraine plays out. To bring it all back home, please consider multiple sources of anything you see about this conflict, including anything I put out. I have access to the same information, no more, no less than anyone watching this video. So I'm happy to keep sharing places that I look for information. Just know they're not best consumed in a vacuum, just as a small part of an overall search. But that's all I got for now. I'll see y'all next time.